Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Lamont, and I'm hostess of Ladies Get Your Prance On. And each week, I bring for you a very, very special guest who is an expert who's going to be sharing tips and tools and techniques for those of you who are entrepreneurs to help you grow your business and to be seen. And so going into the year of 2018, I got this very special guest. Her name is Melina Palmer. And her company is called Define Gravity. And no, she doesn't teach you how to jump out of airplanes. She is going to explain it. So welcome, Melina.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Is it Melinda or Melina?
Melina.
That's okay. I'm glad I got it right. I went, all of a sudden I had this panic attack. So I just, I want people to know who may not know who you are. If you can share where we met at and then talk about your company.
Absolutely. So my background is in marketing and branding work, which I've done for over a decade now. And through that work, I previously worked at a credit union and led the marketing team there up in the greater Seattle area. And I've recently started my own company, like you said, Define Gravity, which I've actually had for about 3 years now, but I'm doing it full time as I'm getting my master's in behavioral economics, which is the approach that I bring that is different than what you get from other marketers. So it's a really new field. It's super interesting bringing psychology and economics together and how the brain works and factoring that into marketing decisions, brand decisions, just conversations you have with people, really understanding how all of our brains work when we have those conversations throughout our lives. So we met when I was speaking at an event a couple of weeks ago through the Chick Chat group, which was great to go and speak to that group, and glad that we touched base and here today.
When I met you there, I'm like, I have to have her on my show because it was interesting because you were talking also about people, women, especially how we make marketing decisions. There are certain things that people use behavioral. Can you address that a little bit?
Sure. So I always like to start when I talk about behavioral economics to talk about the brain and how the brain works and how it's sort of developed over time. So you have your subconscious brain and your conscious brain, and people know those terms, but you don't really think about the subconscious part of your brain because instead, all you can really relate to is the conscious cognitive part, because that's the part you know about. And that's what basically when you're thinking about thinking, even though that sounds silly. But all the other stuff that's going on, you know that it exists, but don't really think about how much influence it has on your day-to-day life. And studies have shown that that subconscious processing part of your brain is actually doing between 95%, and I've seen as high as 99.999% of your brain's activity. And so if you think that in reality, that conscious cognitive processing that you think is what your brain is doing is only maybe 1% of what's going on, there's a whole lot of other stuff that's influencing all of our decisions every day. So people in general have a tendency to build brands and marketing and programs and products and services around in this cognitive space because that's how you're thinking about it. When you build it, that's the area of your brain that is working when you're actually making it. But if you don't understand how people's brains actually develop and how that subconscious is going to make a choice, you could be making really fatal flaws and not knowing it. And really small things can make a huge difference.
And when you talk about, the subconscious mind, because we're both on the same page as a hypnotherapist, I'm very well aware of that. So can you give an example of something that somebody might do in a product? Let's just talk about Nike, because that's a very, everyone knows Nike. I mean, their little swish, just do it. Is that the kind of what behavior you're talking about, or is it something completely different than that? Or do they tie in?
It definitely would tie in. And so the thing is where you've heard Nike, you know what Nike is. There's a very interesting book on neurobranding by a man named Steidel. Actually, it's just called neurobranding, but he talks about how a brand is a memory, is what he says in his book, which is a really interesting thing when you think about that brands are just made up of all of the factors that piece together, and it's whatever you remember in your brain is what a brand actually is. And so Nike is made up of all the instances of times that you've seen it or heard it, or somebody that wore it, or all these other factors. And the way that people would react to the Just Do It slogan or something running or whatever it happens to be would be based on those influences that they've had over time. When it comes to just in general, the way that your subconscious brain works. So it's different than, I've gotten this question before. It's not like left brain and right brain. They're not working. One's working and now the other's working. It doesn't go that way. They're both constantly, your subconscious and conscious brain going at the same time. And a really good way to think about how this works and applies to you is if you think about when you learn to drive a car, when you were a kid, especially if you were driving a stick shift, you're really conscious about, this is where my hands go, this is where I have to reach down, and then the left foot does this and the right foot does this, and mirrors and all that stuff. And then, so that was your conscious brain working. And then over time, it got to be a lot easier, where now you just sort of go with the flow, you don't notice it. So now it's part of your subconscious. And your brain is making decisions. It's still having to think about where your hands are and when you're hitting your turn signal and when you're hitting the gas, but it's not having to alert your conscious brain as something that it needs to be aware of until maybe someone swerves into your lane, or you are driving a car that you haven't used before and you go to do a step e-brake and actually it's to the side of you, and then you realize, oh, how silly, of course I'm in a new car. And then your conscious brain gets alerted. So really your subconscious is just going through making decisions, saying normal, 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 normal. I have a rule for this. I have a rule for that. This is how this would work. And when something comes up that stumps your brain, the subconscious part, it'll flag and send it to your conscious brain to deal with. But it's still processing all of these other things. So if you habitually buy Nike products, and you're seeing them and it's, oh, great, I love those shoes. Oh, that's a really cool shirt. Oh yeah, I need a new sports bra. Awesome, cool, great, whatever. And then maybe something comes up that would alert you. But if you're habitually buying Nike, that your brain would consider and see it different than it would Adidas or another brand.
You bring up a good point with that too, and I'm glad, thank you for explaining that, because a lot of women entrepreneurs are really confused on what a brand is. Is a brand a logo? Is it the tagline? Is it the colors? Is it my website? If you could maybe explain a little bit exactly what a brand is.
So a brand is yes, 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 all those things, all put together, as well as really everything else. So when you think about a brand, it's also the perception of what people have. So if you were to say that you're something and say, my company is the, great service, or, in Nike's case, it's high quality running apparel or something. And if they were to be having with great service, let's say, and then you go into a Nike store and the people are really rude, or you have a bad experience, that impacts what your perception is of the Nike brand. And if enough people have this negative connotation and experience with the brand, that reality, that perception is reality, and that becomes what your brand is. So what people have to say about it. And in the world of social media, you really have to be darn sure that everything you're doing is in alignment with whatever your brand is and what you're trying to communicate. What I like to say is, marketing is all the one-off stuff that we do in our company. So you need a brochure, you have a website, you have, the logo that goes on things, your tagline, if you're making an advertisement, whatever, that's all marketing. And you can have a bunch of one-offs that don't really go together to be cohesive. Whereas a brand is that you have a vision, you have a statement of this is what we are, you build it out, and then everything that comes up, every opportunity gets put through this filter of what the brand is. And does this enhance the brand or does it detract from the brand? And then putting it all into alignment with that, whether it is a logo, an advertisement, the colors, everything comes together. And the people that you hire, the talking points that you give them, the events that you participate in, all of that is part of your brand.
It is. And, and that's the other reason why there's lots of reasons why I want you on the show. I'm so glad you're on the show today. But the other thing too that, and I'm going back to Nike because that's just generic and it's easy because everyone knows what Nike is. one of the things, like, for example, when Tiger Woods was on top of his game in golf, he proudly wore the Nike emblem, and he had it on his hat. And I don't want to I don't want to disparage Tiger Woods, because, the poor guy's been through a lot, but I'm giving an example. And so Nike immediately stepped up and took him off the brand, like, cut the contract, and because they have this reputation to uphold. So they are showing the media that was, unhappy with him, that we hear you, and going forward with a clear message. And the other thing too that Nike does, that I'm tying back to women entrepreneurs, is that Nike invests in their brand. They don't just put Nike just do it. They're continuously having ads, commercials, hiring well-known people. So if they're going to have a famous football player or baseball player, wear their logo, I mean, that's what we have to do. And so women entrepreneurs that are watching this, I want them to know that they need to invest in their business and their brand and their company if they want to be seen. Just going to networking events and just, there's no such thing as six-figure, deals out there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The celebrity endorsements are an interesting thing, where you're talking about, Tiger Woods, and you have to be really careful as an organization if you're hitching your wagon to anyone, because you don't really know what can happen. And, in that case, there's a lot of research into the way that as a consumer, your brain relates to that person, and then what then gets tied into the brand. So before any sort of issues with Tiger Woods, or so with any of the athletes that they have, there are certain traits about those people. And, so here in Seattle, if you're a Seahawks fan, you would say Russell Wilson is a very different person than Richard Sherman. And as a brand, you have to know who they are. They're both great men. I'm a fan of both of them. But whatever your style, the brand voice, who you are, you're very different having Richard Sherman as a spokesperson than you would be having Russell Wilson. So, I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Yeah. A concept in behavioral economics that ties back to, as I would assume most of the female entrepreneurs or anybody that's watching this doesn't have a Nike budget to be working with and signing large people, big names like that to be a celebrity endorsement, where you say, oh, that's great, but, what do I do? And so the term for this through behavioral economics, the concept is that I would want to tie back to is called availability, which is essentially if people are talking about something, being part of that conversation and coming up in the brain is really important. So when people start talking about something a lot, when people talk about, so if there's a flood, people are more likely to get flood insurance because you're hearing about it, about it. People are more afraid of sharks than they are of cows, even though there are 23, I think, cow-related deaths in the U.S. every year, and there's less than one shark attack in the U.S. But because all we ever hear about sharks is that they have sharp teeth and they bite, and those are the stories you hear in the news and what you see, then that's what people tie to that particular item.
So it's all those late night cow tippings going on out there on these farms that are, and that I love that, because if you could repeat that again about how people have this perception of the sharks and the cows, I think that's beautiful.
Right. So if you think about sharks, if I say, hey, think about a shark, you probably think of their teeth and that they're going to bite you and that sharks kill people, right? That's sort of what you think, where in reality, there are a lot more cow-related deaths in the United States. But because of all the news and everything that comes up about sharks, you have this different opinion of them than cows with their beautiful brown eyes and how sweet and loving they are. But the thing to think about in a brand perspective for this is, so when people are talking about things that seem sort of unrelated or random, they can actually have a big impact on a brand. So back in the 90s at some point, Mars bars saw a really huge spike in the sales. And they didn't do anything different. They weren't doing anything. And so they didn't understand and started digging into what was going on. And it was because of Mars rover. So Mars rover was in the news a lot, and people were very literally, apparently, having conversations like, hey, did you hear about the Mars rover? Yeah, that's cool. I could really go for a Mars bar. And then you go and you're buying them. So your brain, while it's very smart in a lot of ways, makes really silly connections that it can then be tying to. So if Mars bars would have known about that in advance, they potentially could have done something to kind of hitch their wagon to the Mars rover being discussed, knowing people are going to be saying the word Mars a lot. So what can we do to be part of that conversation?
Yeah. Well, and that brings Marshawn Lynch with Skittles,
Yes. Oh, yes. No, I don't know that Skittles ever would have thought that they wanted to be part of NFL anything, right? And then, Marshawn Lynch loves his Skittles, and then that is hugely tied in. They have blue and green specific Skittles for the Seahawks and everything that you can get now, which they were very smart in using that availability. People are talking about this, and in their case, they were fortunate that it included them, but it doesn't always have to include you specifically to have a tie-in like Mars bars.
Yes. And so having you on the show today, this is what you do. I mean, you help entrepreneurs with their brand. You help with the brain going on and helping them to understand the psychology by looking at their websites, seeing colors and everything that they're using. And you've also written a book that I would love for you to share too about that.
Yeah, so behavioral economics is what I bring to the table. And there are so many concepts that go into play. That availability piece is something I was talking about, but that's one of many trends in the way that your brain works, different rules of thumb it uses, and the way that it acts. That are important to understand in branding and marketing. And so one of my favorite things to be able to do is to sit down with a client, whether it would be a solopreneur or a larger organization with their marketing department, really look at everything that exists and being able to say, okay, this worked and let's figure out why, or this didn't work and let's figure out why, and then to set up a test to see, well, if we try to change this or do that, let's see how this could work, and taking those aspects of how the brain actually behaves and bringing that into marketing and being able to show. I've seen studies throughout my schooling. I've read a lot of studies, but where a simple case of a change of one word in an advertisement that was just an end cap retail display had a 38% increase in sales in one versus the other for one word difference. And so really small tweaks that can make a big difference. And so being able to evaluate what you have, and it's not your expertise, you do whatever you do. So having somebody like me that can come in and say, actually, this is probably implying this to the subconscious brain. So let's try to tweak it and move it this way and see if you have enough. So,
that I gotta stop. That is huge.
Yes.
And that is the reason why I wanted you on the show, because a lot of people are thinking and marketing to the conscious mind, and understanding how the subconscious mind works and operates. There was one little story you told too about candy bars.
Yeah,
we shared that one too. I love that one.
That was actually the one I was just referencing with that 38% increase. So actually it was an end cap display. They did a test where for Snickers bars. So in one, for a while, they had said, Snickers bars, buy them for your freezer. And then the other version said, Snickers bars, buy 18 for your freezer, which is a ridiculous amount of Snickers to suggest, unless you are buying for a football team or something, you're probably not buying 18 of them. But that small difference, and this concept is called anchoring and adjustment. But so you set that high number, and when it said 18 versus them, buy them for your freezer to buy 18, there was a 38% increase in the sale of Snickers bars. And the reason really that happens is if you think about, if you see an ad that says Snickers, buy them for your freezer, you say, oh, okay, yeah, I should buy a couple. Maybe you get one or two. Maybe the word them suggests that you get a couple more if you would typically buy one. Whereas if it says 18 is the number, basically your brain would see that number and think, oh, I'm better than most people. I don't need 18. I'm much healthier. I'll just get 6, which is still much higher than you would have gotten without that prompt. But so your sales are up, but it's, less than that number. So, I like to say those arbitrary and I'm sure that's a totally arbitrary number. Why would they pick 18? I don't know. But
we don't have a numerologist on the show. I'll have to ask my friends that are into numerology. I'll ask Jen Duchenne because she's an astronumerologist. So I'll ask her what the psychology is, because, numbers do play a role in that too.
Absolutely.
That definitely does.
Right.
So how can people find your book? How can they find you? And do you work with people one-on-one, like video or telephone, or do they have to meet you in person? Because even though you and I are both based in Washington State, a lot of the prancing kittens are from all over the world.
Yes, so I would be happy to do meetings via Zoom or over the phone or whatnot. If we can meet in person, that's preferable, especially if you're looking at marketing pieces. Sometimes it's nice to have that, and I always like to meet people in person. But if you can't, I can appreciate that the world of technology allows us to have different types of meetings now and can get a lot from just video chat. So yes, definitely I can do remote discussions as well as in-person meetings. And to find me, so my website is brandsthatsoar.com, and that is where you can go to download my ebook, which is the 10 behavioral economics concepts you need to know and how to apply them. And you can get that, download it for free. And then I send out regular tips through my newsletter. You can also watch, I do tip videos on my YouTube channel, which is also just Brands That Soar, or Facebook, which is also Brands That Soar. Makes it easy to find.
Wonderful. And I will attach those to the show too. Is there any final message that you would like to give there's a lot of women entrepreneurs, they fail. The majority of people within 3 years, they fail. Do you have any words of wisdom for these that are thinking of hanging up and getting a day job?
Well, I would say that what I have seen over the years and through the study of this behavior and whatnot is the smallest changes can make a huge difference. And so being able to take, and I can appreciate that it's a risk to hire somebody to come in and work with you and to spend that money, especially if you don't know if you want to stay open or if you can afford to stay open. To make that investment can be hard. I totally get it. I'm a solo entrepreneur myself, but when somebody's able to come in and say, this one thing is causing this reaction in the brain, and then maybe you see a 50% increase when you make a small change like that, when somebody's coming in and saying, well, let's look at this. And what you're actually saying to the brain is this, and what you want to be doing is this. So I mean, my perspective tends to be the sunny, bright side of the world and doing everything that you can to make it work. If it's the thing that you're meant to be doing, finding the way to communicate it properly to people is really important. And it's hard in this world that we live in now. People are exposed to, the last statistic I saw was over 5,000 logos and brand messages people see every day. Over 5,000 a day.
Wow.
That you're seeing. Where if you look here, we've got the Zoom logo. I've got a ton on my computer screen, and I see my Apple here, all those logos you see all the time. And so your brain, you just sort of shut a lot of things out. And so to be able to cut through that clutter, you need to be investing in the right way of speaking to that brain. And that's what I would like to help people do.
And also that you're going to be able, anyone who is, maybe they've hired other coaches and they're still not seeing the success. I mean, you can take and look at that, because they just might need some tweaks. Like, when I hear from people that, I've worked with coaches and I'm not seeing the ROIs coming back, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they wasted their money on that coach, that maybe there's some tweaks and adjustments, because I know a lot of people out there have invested money. And so being able to work with you to be able to take a look at everything that they have and be able to use your magic of the subconscious mind to help them out. So thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you taking out time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
And I will attach all the information for you to reach out and download your ebook and join in with her. And thank you so much. And we will be back next week. So everybody have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.